And welcome back to Janky AF and Year of the Aerostar, episode number 110. Well, that is quite the milestone. We're almost, we're a tenth of the way to our second half of 100 episodes. We have a very nice Ford Aerostar today, and with that sort of facts and figures, we've also hit 700 subscribers. In fact, blown by 700 subscribers. Janky do thank you to all of you who have subscribed to this beautiful, beautiful channel. As you know, we hope you think it's beautiful. We think it's beautiful. We think the Ford Aerostar is beautiful, and we're going to talk about a Ford Aerostar today. So, as is our wont. So here we go. Here we have a 1997 Ford Aerostar cargo minivan, listed for $1,950, not $2,000, not $1,995, but not $1,975, but $1,950, listed in Hackensack, New Jersey. Hackensack, New Jersey, one of our favorite places, of course, because it is the birthplace of hacky sack. That is the second time I've made that joke, which means we've had two Aerostars in Hackensack, New Jersey. I do not believe that's actually true. But, you know, rest in peace to the great Norm Macdonald. That seems like a joke that he may have, you know, come up with, so we'll honor him in that way. Okay, about this vehicle. Driven 181,300 miles. I like that specific amount. Automatic transmission, exterior color white, interior color gray. The fuel type is gasoline. We got 15 mpg city, 22 highway for a combined 18. 2 owners, and the vehicle is paid off. It'd be amazing if this vehicle actually had only 2 owners. Okay, seller description. A lot of pictures today, which is nice. I like. This is a good listing. You know, we critique the listing just as much as we critique the van, as I always say on this program. And you know, this is the type of listing that makes me want to go out and buy an Aerostar. Now, in fairness, every Aerostar listing is a listing that makes me want to go out and buy an Aerostar. But this one I feel like is nice and straightforward. There's ample amount of pictures, just enough detail. And you feel like, you know what you're getting into when you buy it. And that's all you can really ask when you buy a vehicle online off of a stranger. Seller's description. Fair condition, needs brakes, oil change EXT, oil change extended. I think they mean etc, ETC, but they wrote EXT. I'm just going to go ahead and say I think they mean ETC, oil change extra. A wash. If you need a little work van to get you around locally, this is for you. Well, I both do and don't need a little work van to get me around locally, and I think this van is for me either way. My cell, hidden information. By the way, how do you find the hidden information? I've never seen a link to click on hidden information. How do you get this person's cell phone number? Does anyone know? I'm sort of, you know, not totally technologically savvy. You wouldn't know it by watching this program, obviously. But how do you get the hidden info? How do I see this person's cell phone number so that I can just text them instead of, you know, messaging them? I never. If you know in the comments, please let me know. Call or text, I'll give you details. So that's great. You know, you could have a text conversation with this individual, make it nice and easy, see, you know, what exactly the situation is. Now, when it needs brakes, does it just need pads and rotors? Does it need, you know, calipers and lines? That would be the first question I would probably ask. I like, you know, if you need a little work van to get you around locally, this is for you. That reminds me of one of my favorite lines I've ever seen, and I've probably told you about it before. I don't even think it was an Aerostar, but it said, good car to get from A to B, but don't try to get to point C. I thought that was fantastic. And that's exactly what they mean here, you know. You know, if you're just bopping around town, it's probably fine, which sort of implies that it might break down, you know, it might. But, you know, at least if it does, you're not, you know, stranded on the side of the highway. As I was when I bought my first Aerostar, but that's another story for another time. Okay, so I love the cargo van. Anytime a cargo pops up, it just makes me a little bit happy. And here's where we're getting to more stats and figures, just as I'll do a little self-promotion in the moment. So I actually am on, you know, Beef Janky and Janky AF is on TikTok. If you're TikTokers out there, that we do have a TikTok presence. I don't really advertise it, but the hashtag year of the Aerostar has 36,100 views. I'm pretty proud of that. You know, it's for a very niche thing. You know, 36.1 thousand views on the hashtag year of the Aerostar. Now, in comparison, the hashtag Ford Aerostar has 2.3 million views. So if you divide 2.3 million by 36,100, you get 63.7. So that means that because I use the hashtag Ford Aerostar in all of my year of the Aerostar posts, that means that, you know, basically 1 out of every 63 posts, or we'll call it 64, 1 out of every 64 posts on TikTok that reference a Ford Aerostar or use that hashtag is one of my clips of Year of the Aerostar. And actually, because, you know, there's a little bit of duplication going on there because I'm also adding to the Ford Aerostar hashtag with my posts. But I thought that was kind of cool. Yeah, to me, that's a pretty good ratio, you know, of all the Ford Aerostars in all the world and all the people driving them and posting about them on TikTok. I have a fairly, you know, solid little presence in there. So I just, you know, I did that because I was thinking about ratios, because I was thinking about, and I guess I should say my TikTok handle, I believe, is AF_Janky, same as it is on Instagram, I think, if you know, if you're interested, whatever. But I was thinking about ratios because I was thinking, how many cargo Aerostars did they make in comparison to the passenger Aerostar? Now, the cargo version was made all the way from 86 to 97. The Aerostar was introduced as a sort of dual-purpose vehicle, and unlike the extended Aerostar, and unlike the four-wheel drive Aerostar, and unlike the Sport Edition Aerostar, which were only offered in specific years on the Aerostar, I believe the extended and all-wheel drive came out, or four-wheel drive technically, or I don't know, you know, there's arguments over that, but came out in around 1989, 1990. I'm not sure if they came out the exact year. Hopefully someone can help me here. But it was around 89, 90 that the extended and the four-wheel drive and the Eddie Bauer edition and all that came out. Eddie Bauer is another one that didn't run the entire length of the vehicle. Manual transmissions were offered initially in 86, but I think by around 94, 95, those had gone away, and I did not offer them in 97 because 97 was solely offered with the new 5-speed automatic transmission, the first 5-speed automatic in any minivan. And this is a 97, so clearly the cargo was made all the way from 86 to 97. So in that respect, there's a lot of them out there because they were made the entire run. However, you know, whatever, I don't know what Ford sales projections were and how many cargoes they wanted to sell versus passenger vans, but you see far fewer cargoes. Now, it would be ironic and kind of funny if approximately 1 out of every 64 Aerostars made was a cargo version. And I don't think the ratio is quite that high. I think it's more like, you know, 20%, 25%, maybe less, maybe like 15%. Because you know, in my anecdotal evidence, I feel like you see a lot more passengers rather than cargoes. But you see enough cargoes out there that it was a decent amount. You know, a lot of tradespeople use them and still do, obviously. And I think they were sold to a lot of fleets. You know, so they were probably ordered 10 or 20 at a time for college campuses. You know, large companies that had a big fleet of vehicle, whether they're cable companies, telephone companies. Now, police and fire vehicles were also ordered as Aerostars, but I believe a lot of those were actually passenger vehicles that were, you know, then converted, maybe more so for the police than the fire. So it's just interesting. I would like to hear what, you know, your guesses are as to what percentage of Aerostars are cargo versions. And I define cargo version as having the barn doors, because you did see, you know, occasionally you'll see a passenger version that has like sort of a panel or a semi-panel. Obviously you can see here, I call this like sort of the semi-cargo or the windowed cargo. It doesn't have a full panel on your sliding door side, on your passenger side. Whereas on the other side, we'll skip ahead in the pictures, obviously we see a full panel there. And this is, you know, even more rare were the extended length cargo versions. Those are extremely rare, and I have actually seen, I wish I was doing this program when it came out, I've seen an extended length cargo manual transmission Aerostar. I think it was like a 92. It was down in Texas, and I always rue not being able to, you know, have the capacity to purchase that vehicle. That was a true rare gem. However, let's talk about this Aerostar specifically. In terms of aesthetics, you know, you have some rust creeping in various spots. Around the panels, that's pretty common. A lot of times these welds weren't perfect, and you know, you would just get corrosion in there. We do have a little creeping in on your rear passenger, I don't know why I can't think of the term, you know, your wheel well. The bottom of the van looks pretty dented up. It looks like it's been like jacked up in sort of the wrong places. And there's some bending going on, but actually the rocker panels, at least from here, you never quite know until you get under it, but look in pretty good condition. And also you're missing one hubcap and you have one. That's like just, I don't know, why not? You know, it's like pretty common. I personally would just rip all the hubcaps off. Of course, I would paint the steel wheels, probably white in this case to match the body. I think that would look pretty slick. Same sort of guise as my 1995 Buick LeSabre. And thank you, by the way, to all the people who have commented. I just responded to about, you know, 30 comments. And I would like to do that more frequently, but usually I'll do them in batches. So sorry if I hadn't gotten to your comment before, but I should be all caught up by now. But there's something janky and wonderful about sort of just like mismatched hubcaps or one on, one not on. It just gives that little, you know, sort of mishmash janky aesthetic, which I like. But overall, you know, in really good condition, and notably, both bumpers are fully intact. And that is, and it does look like we have a tow hitch down here too. Obviously, you can see with the beautiful New Jersey license plate. I quite like the yellow fade out gradient. And of course the barn door is very striking on an Aerostar because the badging is in sort of a unique place. Obviously we do see our 97 taillights without the amber in them. And, you know, I like any sort of vehicular asymmetry. So the Nissan Cube did this with the wraparound windows. And, you know, your door handle's off to one side as it has to be. It can't be in the middle because you have two separate doors. And therefore, they put the license plate off center too. Now, it's interesting, and thank you to the Quirky Garage 1999, who has a wealth of information, especially on foreign Aerostars. We saw one of the last Aerostars in France. And, you know, the Aerostar did come with a wider license plate. On the backside, the license plate was wide enough for a European license plate. Now, what's interesting is the cargo versions, it's a US only license plate slot, which means, and this would check out with Quirky Garage's research, because they said that in France, it was only the Eddie Bauer edition passenger vehicle, so the top trim line that was offered natively in France. That would make sense. They were probably not sold as a cargo version. I'm not sure why, because you think they would have been quite competitive, because cargo vans, especially small cargo vans, are very big in Europe. You know, according to Wikipedia, the Ford Aerostar, or the Ford Transit Connect, excuse me, is the spiritual successor to the Aerostar. So that's funny is that. And they did make a passenger version of the Transit, so that actually kind of checks out. Even though it was a front-wheel drive vehicle, not a rear-wheel drive, it is kind of very similar in a lot of ways. It was passenger and cargo. It was offered with a manual transmission, except not here in America, shamefully, because, boy, the Transit I had, it really would have benefited from a manual transmission. 97 also, you can see by that time you needed a third brake light, so they just sort of plopped that right on top. But I found that interesting. So they must not have offered the Aerostar cargo in a European market, which, you know, checks out by the size of the license plate holder. So a little bit of sleuthing down here. You know, even your back, these little panels right here, if you can try to see that, this little quarter panel right below the taillight, or this little rounded scoop here, that oftentimes is dented for whatever reason. And unfortunately, it's very, very hard to get that dent out because the metal in that specific spot is very, very thick and there's no real good way to access it from the inside either. So the fact that those are all intact is a very good sign. And your bumper's fully intact. And Aerostar bumper covers, this plastic piece here, is notoriously hard to find. And I would imagine even more so in the cargo version, as we see it with the doors open here, because your bumper is slightly different. On the passenger bumper, this plastic piece here would actually rise up to fill in this gap between your sheet metal and where your bumper cover is. But on the cargo version, there is this little hinge here that takes up that position. So for that reason, I believe, I haven't actually seen it up close and in person, but I'm fairly certain that the bumper is actually different on the cargo version. Now you could probably amend it, as we see just the ample amount of room that's back here. There's so much room back here. It's crazy. The combination of the height and the width, and there's just nothing, you know, on modern SUVs and crossovers, you open in our household, we have a Subaru Forester and my Toyota Prius V. and they're very nice in a length, capacity, but in the height, and then on the sides, actually the Aerostar, a lot of these vehicles, as it approaches the hatchback, they'll get a lot narrower. Whereas this car, it actually gets wider when it goes past the hatch, the top of the taillights. It actually gets wider, and so you really don't appreciate how much stuff you can pack in an Aerostar until you see one up close, and especially when you realize how small the vehicle is in proportion up close. I mean, only 14-inch wheels and tires on these things. I mean, that's only an inch larger than my Fiat X19, which is basically golf cart tires. Here we see the side again, and you can see how there's this little chunk taken out of the bumper right here. And so I'm fairly certain it is a unique bumper, and those would be really hard to come by. So of course I would like to one day be able to create these bumpers from scratch using some like sort of CAD design and 3D printing. If anyone beats me to it, good for them, but I would like to do that. Of course, your front bumper is universal, and that fits any Aerostars because even the extended lengths and all those all have the same front bumper. So that's a little easier to track down. However, still not totally easy, and this one has a fully intact front bumper right here too. Now in the description they did mention that it needed a wash, and that looks very accurate because this thing looks like it's never been washed in its life. That mud and just everything, mildew that's on there, you wonder how this would shine up after a washing. It'd probably look pretty good. Then again, some of that stuff might just be embedded in there. And I really like the look of course, the front end of the Aerostar. Another thing you don't realize in the Aerostar until you look at it, another great comment someone had was that they said they jumped an Aerostar 50 feet, and then later they had a manual transmission Aerostar. The first one was automatic. They rolled that completely over. Both times they were able to drive away from the incident. So, speaking to the Aerostar's toughness. But you don't realize till you look at an Aerostar head on, and this isn't necessarily the best example because we're already a little higher up, so your vantage point is looking downward. But if you look at these straight on, you realize how low in proportion to the entire height of the vehicle the headlights are. Like, they sit incredibly low, which gives it kind of a goofy little face, but a very sort of endearing one and a very cute one, and yet, serious in its own way, like a purposeful vehicle that has a happy demeanor, and that's, a nice thing in a vehicle. So we can see it looks like they have a pretty new interstate batteries. Boy, car batteries are getting so expensive, just like anything else. I mean, if it has a good battery in it, that's $220 right there that you're saving by not having to buy a new one. Of course, it does look like the 3-liter in here. You can kind of tell the block looks a little bit different, and it's just a little less cramped than the 4-liter. Again, your sliding door. I'm always amazed, every Aerostar that I've encountered, the sliding door. Now, when it comes to latch it, sometimes it'll pop back a little bit on you, and you have to be a little intentional in how you slide it. But the sliders themselves, they're never, from what I've seen, they're never, it's like the weight of the doors never really sagged or anything like that. They still slide great. And, for a 30-year-old vehicle to still, little things like that, like doors and all those little bits and pieces, to still be working properly is pretty impressive, from a build quality standpoint. Here you see a beautiful shot of it with the door slit open. You can just see how much space is in there. And yet up front, you're not cramped at all. This does have the vinyl seats, which I actually absolutely love. In the cargo versions, they all got these like sort of vinyl seats. I think the reason being they would hold up a little bit better, for people who are getting in and out of their cars all the time, especially when they're carrying stuff like knives and utility blades and all that stuff in their pockets, screwdrivers, whatever. Obviously, there has been seat covers in here, so it's probably gotten beat up a little bit anyhow. The steering wheel cover, which is always just a hoot. I get I don't know, I'm not a fan of steering wheel covers. I think they're potentially dangerous if they're slipping, but also I like a nice thin steering wheel. And the Aerostar did have a very nice thin steering wheel from the factory. Obviously, we have this sort of updated interior here. This beautiful, it's such a departure. You look at, I look at a lot of cars online, and before the early 90s, you look at old Ferraris from the 70s and 80s, and every single center console is just a giant box, a big square box that's just been plopped down on top of the dashboard. And eventually, now cars are all crazy and sleek and modern, but the Aerostar in 92, I believe, when it got its sort of refresh on the interior, the swooping sculpted nature of this whole area here actually is quite futuristic and quite svelte, if I do say so myself. Now this little corner does tend to pop out. That's very normal. That does happen on my 93. But it really, and it was quite a hearkening of what was to come for Ford, because after this, of course, like the Ford Taurus went from this like very angular Audi-esque thing that was called futuristic when it came out, and then of course everything went from like boxy and square to bubbly and rounded. If you look at the Escorts, or the Taurus is probably the best example from that era. Every single thing on that was a circle and a bubble, and here it was sort of a hearkening of what was to come, but I think just looks very nice and elegant, if I do say so. The interior of this vehicle, also your ride height is really nice. It's a small car and it doesn't ride very high, but you still feel like, a lot of people you hear that buy SUVs, I like to ride high up because it makes me feel safer. The ride height in the Aerostar is fantastic, and when you put the door sills are still narrow enough and low enough that you can get your left elbow onto the door sill. And yet when you pop that armrest down, you can put that in almost the same position. So you can just let your elbows sit on the armrest and the door sill respectively, and just, hold the wheel like here. And it's an incredibly comfortable driving experience. I really got to say, they really nailed the ergonomics of this vehicle. The Transit Connect, especially those early ones, the European ones before they, updated the style, those real boxy Transit Connects that everyone knows. The armrest on that thing was just complete garbage. It was narrow and it would never stay in, and I just got rid of mine after a while. It just fell out. The whatever bracket or hardware they had in there to hold it down was just totally trash. And that car, my 2012 Transit, was, well, compared to my 86, was 96, 2006, 26 years newer, and yet the armrest had already fallen apart. And here, my two Aerostars, the armrest is still in great condition. So, they don't make them like they used to, as they say. And in a lot of respects, these older vehicles were just, a little bit more solid. And so it's a great, especially if you're a worker and you're driving around all day, you basically live out of your car. And to have something that's comfortable to drive in is really, it's important. And the stereo in my 93 Aerostar is certainly better than the stereo in my 2012 Transit. I would say it's a quieter riding experience. It's a little bit more comfortable. You have your crank windows, which I love. Crank windows always good, just in case for whatever reason you drive off of a pier. You can get your windows down without, electronic failure. You don't get trapped in your car. It looks like, I just noticed this near the door. Speaking about all the quality of the fit and finish, and you have your whole door panel completely ripped off here. So your grab bar, obviously that's been sort of used and abused, but just take a few screws and pop them in there. You don't have to worry about hitting any electronics because it's all manual anyways, and you'll be good to go. Fairly clean, for how old and beat it up is, especially on the outside. Your interior, your carpets don't look too terribly stained or anything like that. So, for under $2,000, I just read this article how it's impossible to find a car for under $20,000 now, and it's just not the case. You just got to know where to look. And even if you got to dump $3 or $4 grand into this thing, you're sitting at under $6 grand for like a really, pretty sorted out vehicle. And yes, you're going to have to put money in these older cars. All your seals and anything that's rubber and plastic on the car is probably going to fail eventually. But I still think for the point of entry and not having to borrow money at such a high interest rate, it's still worth it. So I'm highly considering getting as we look at one more shot of the interior here, also a great, I talk about this all the time, but legendary steering wheel. The horn buttons are in a very ergonomic position. This steering wheel was used in everything. It was even used in Aston Martins, as we saw a couple episodes ago. The part's been at its greatest. But I really want to get a cargo Aerostar because I can carry ladders on my Prius. I have a ladder rack, and I've put a 28-foot ladder on it. It can do it, but I don't like riding around with a ladder rack because it creates a lot of wind noise. I pay $143 a month for car insurance because I have a commercial policy because of it's a business. It's a long story. I haven't actually registered the car in my LLC's name, but I want to. So I got a commercial policy on that. They won't let me put commercial plates on it, which really grinds my gears because they will give me a commercial policy on it. So if it's a business vehicle, why can't I put a commercial plate on it? Makes no sense to me. Anyways, what I'm thinking about doing is getting a cargo Aerostar, and if I can convert my Prius back to a regular insurance policy and then get this vehicle, I wouldn't be able to register it and insure it as historical, I think, if I'm using it as a work vehicle, because then it's no longer like, now I know it's not show and display, but for practicality purposes, classic car insurance, they don't want it to be your daily driver. So I'd probably have to put regular insurance on it. But I'm thinking between what this costs to insure and what my Prius would cost to insure as a commercial vehicle, it might only be $100 a month between them. And so if I'm saving $43 a month just right off the bat, and then I use this to haul around my ladders and stuff, but then drive my Prius when I just need to show up, $40 a month, how long does that take to accumulate $2,000? A couple of years maybe, but then after those couple of years, you've saved enough money where you can justify basically having another vehicle, for basically no cost with the money you saved. So that's what I'd like to do, and of course it's a good excuse just to buy an Aerostar. Perhaps some of you fall into that boat. I tell people all the time, having just like an auxiliary vehicle, whether you got to go to Home Depot and pick stuff up, whether you want to go camping with it on the weekends, whether your car's in the shop and you just want something to get around in, especially if it's, a little work van to get you around locally. I really always advocate for getting, say if you're a 2-car family, getting a 3rd car just to have, because it really comes in handy more than you'd think. And if you did do that in that respect, if you insured it and registered it as historic, the money it costs you per year is so minimal that I really think it's worth it. And an Aerostar, I think, is a great choice, even if you don't need a work vehicle, because they have plenty of space in them, and yet it's a compact, small vehicle. You can chuck it in a garage. It doesn't take up a lot of space. The wheels and tires for it aren't that expensive. Now, 14-inch tires are getting harder to find, but that's neither here nor there. A lot of parts are getting harder to find. But so, that's my pitch. I think an Aerostar, and the great thing about an Aerostar is it was designed to be this dual purpose vehicle or this multi-purpose vehicle, and it still is. It can be your little camper car, it can be your Home Depot car. And then on Sundays, you can take it to the car show, and it's still something unique that people don't see every day. The styling is very distinct and very unique and very of the time, yet I would actually argue is quite timeless and has aged extremely well. This sort of minimalism. So it really can do it all, and if you get a manual transmission Aerostar, then you got manual transmission rear wheel drive. Then if you really wanted to, you could go drift it, you might roll it over, but as this one person commented, you'd probably still be able to drive it home. As I drive home here, my points about the Ford Aerostar. So there you go. Thank you very much. So again, 1950, maybe you negotiate, maybe you get it for $1,700 you get under there, you fix the brakes on it. If it's just pads and rotors, it'll cost you a few $100 plus a couple hours in your parking lot if nothing's seized up or anything like that. And you have a beautiful little vehicle. Now it's got 181,000 miles on it, but as we've seen Aerostars over 300,000 miles. So there's no reason to think that, it's one of those things where if it's made it this far and it doesn't have any head gasket issues, it stands to reason that it'll probably keep going. And if you're only putting 1,000 miles on it a year, then that figure is going to drastically slow from when this thing was used as a daily driver and put 10 or 15,000 miles on a year. So you might own this car for 15 years and still not have it over 200,000 miles. So I realize I'm preaching to the choir, but if anyone just happens to stumble on this video, again, these things, and you look at any vehicle out there, any used vehicle from 1997, in running driving condition, it's going to be hard to find one this cheap. And again, for all you're getting with an Aerostar, all the different possible incarnations and uses that you could have for it, it really, it's kind of like the Corvette in terms of sports cars. You can't beat the bargain that you're getting for a Corvette. And while it's tempting maybe to go for something, more exotic, quote unquote, like people buy Previas or buy the Toyota vans or those Japanese right-hand drive vans, those Delicas or anything like that, I think the Aerostar draws just as much attention because it's just as unique looking, and these days it's kind of just as rare too. So, don't forget about, don't forget about the old Aerostar. And as many people will always, misconstrue it as an Astrovan, it is not an Astrovan, it is an Aerostar. And that's what we talk about here on Year of the Aerostar, here on Janky AF. So, with that, thank you so much for watching. We'll have another episode coming very soon. And until then, Janky do Thanky.
One small step for man, one giant leap for mankind.